Welcome back to The Heat. I'm joined by a panel of top international reporters, and we're talking about some of the major stories in the news. Welcome back to our panel. Guan, let's get to the nuclear summit, which takes place in Washington next week. It's a nuclear security summit. The Chinese President Xi Jinping will be here. He'll be among 50 or leaders from 50 nations that will be attending that summit. What are expectations?
Well, I think China has been on board for this summit since day one, since 2010, when the summit held its first session. And I think there's a common interest between China and the U.S. to prevent fissile and radioactive materials from falling into the hands of terrorists, because the threat is real. Last month, French investigators, I think, was reported by the Independent newspaper, saying that they found 10 hours of secretly recorded video targeting a Belgian nuclear scientist in the northern Belgian region. So, and they said that the purpose was to potentially kidnap this scientist and get hold of those radioactive materials. So the danger is real, and as recognized nuclear states, China and the U.S. have an interest, along with France, of course, to tackle this issue.
The President Xi Jinping will also be holding a bilateral meeting with President Obama. What is that going to be focusing on?
I think that they will focus on areas of agreements such as climate change, to push forward the bilateral investment treaty that has been in discussion for the past decade. That both sides need to come up with the negative list. And also they will, from my experience, talk about areas of disagreement such as South China Sea. At this point, in my opinion, those two leaders can only agree to disagree on this.
Is it likely they will talk about the missile tests being carried out by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea?
I think that was the discussion in the past. The two countries agreed to sanction the North Korea, the DPRK. The UN sanctioned, the latest UN resolution was passed. And now, at this point, it's about how to implement those.
Okay, Lynn, for the United States, this summit is a big deal, isn't it? They're really worried about terrorists getting hold, not just of a nuclear device, but of even using things like what they call dirty bombs, which is, bombs that use nuclear material.
Right. I mean, it's a big deal within the Obama administration. Writ large, this is not a summit that is very well known to people. And, just one thing I want to follow up on your point when you asked what they could disagree. Here's how the White House said it when they put out a memo on this meeting with the Chinese president. They said they're going to address areas of disagreement constructively. So take it for that's worth. But there have been terrorism plots averted. The shoe bomber, the dirty bomber, it isn't all necessarily with nuclear material. One of the things that has been a ongoing interest to President Obama since he came to Washington as a senator has been the broad issue of nuclear disarmament. So this nuclear summit started on his watch in 2010. It'll be interesting to see if the next president continues it, or if this summit now has grown into a permanent international fixture. There is so much going on in the world right now. It's hard to say, to your question, is this a big deal? With the terrorism in Brussels, with the high alert the world's on, with the fear that something else might happen, there's a lot of incoming right now.
Right, and Laura, the other thing that may have got lost in our coverage of the Brussels attacks is that shortly after those attacks took place, the Belgian government evacuated its nuclear power plant, sent in troops to protect that plant because there was a fear that terrorists would attack the nuclear plant. That must be really scary in Europe, because not only would, of course, you deny people power, but if you hit a nuclear plant, you're going to be affecting the whole continent.
It's absolutely frightening. And I think one element which is interesting is that they decided to put in place, absolutely stringent security measures around 2 nuclear facilities in Belgium after this attack. And I think I've seen in the Belgian media the information that one of the, what was very frightening, they had one of the workers at one of these facility plants had been a follower of ISIS, I don't know, Twitter accounts or whatever. So I think the huge fear that all the countries, that will be at the summit share is, do you have at some point weak element in the system of these nuclear facilities that could sort of provide a way for terrorists into these facilities, for stealing these nuclear materials, or for organizing an explosion. And when you know that, for instance, in France you have tens of nuclear facilities throughout France, which is a big nuclear power, and also that we've been selling, nuclear facilities throughout Europe, and when you know the extreme corruption and weaknesses of Eastern Europe, where you also have nuclear facilities, it is a frightening scenario, and not that now is becoming somehow plausible. That's why it's so frightening.
Yeah, there's a bigger focus on it right now. Okay, finally, I want to move to the US presidential race. Lynn, it's looking more and more likely that this is going to be a race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Is that the way you see it as well?
Well, there's a few bumps in the road that the Republican establishment wants to put in front of Donald Trump. I think it's too soon to say that. I think Hillary Clinton is in good shape to secure the Democratic nomination. The Republican establishment is trying to deny Trump. And I want to say this to our international audience. We have we have 50 states. We have 50 ways that each state figures out who it's going to, how it nominates, how it takes its share of people to weigh in on who becomes the nominee. So that's what we're in the process of right now. And the people who are against Trump started very late to try and derail him. So we're in a very, very chaotic meltdown, potentially of the Republican Party if he's the nominee. And there is a thought that if he is the nominee, it would be very tough to have him elected.
Guan, how engaged are the Chinese with this race so far? Of course, everybody knows Hillary Clinton in China, I would imagine, but how much coverage does someone like Donald Trump get?
Well, you would be surprised to find that a lot of Chinese, especially young people, are pretty impressed with Donald Trump. They watch Celebrity Apprentice. They all watch it one way or the other. And also they think he's a successful business people. And some of them take offense at what Trump said about China, Chinese are cheaters, things like that. He names China too much. But on the other hand, they think he's a person that can do business with China.
Right. Gustau, one of the big issues being discussed, of course, in this election campaign is immigration. Immigration from Mexico, immigration from Central America. How much attention is the election getting in Latin America?
A lot. And it's damaging the U.S. image, even though it's not the nominee yet, but people in Mexico and Latin America in general, they see Donald Trump as a racist and someone that doesn't like Latin Americans and immigrants. And we have to remember that there are a lot of connections between Latin American people and the U.S. because the U.S. society today is not homogeneous. It's plural. And yeah, I think Donald Trump is playing with fire, and it's exploding these sentiments against women and against immigration and against Chinese government and against everybody to get votes. But at the end of the race, he's going to try to go to the center again. And all these groups of people are going to be very angry.
Right. Laura, of course, Europe has a lot of other things preoccupying the continent right now, but is Donald Trump getting a lot of coverage in Europe? Do you send back a lot of stories on that?
Huge. I mean, Donald Trump is one of the major stories in my paper in Europe throughout the continent, because we know that, who becomes president of the U.S. is extremely important, and also because of this sort of larger-than-life and provocative, provocative and tempestuous personality. I think there are three elements which are important for the Europeans, to sort of watch. The first one is why is Donald Trump such a huge success in the U.S.? Why this guy who has no political experience is sort of coming to the forefront and is winning this election despite everything the elite, both right and left, is trying to do. And I think there is what has been very interesting to follow, according to me, is that there is a rebellion in the U.S., a huge popular rebellion against the elite, against the money in politics, against the political correctness, against the way the donor class is actually organizing election, giving money, etc. So that's the first thing. And it's echoing Trump is seen as some kind of buffer or wall against all the woes of globalization, of illegal immigration going uncontrollable, against the threat of terrorism. The people see him as someone who is somehow going to get back a more peaceful, a more protected, a more manageable type of country. And what is interesting is that we have the same phenomenon in Europe, and that's why it's so interesting to us, because we're wondering, we have Le Pen, who's rising like crazy on the question of immigration, the question of terrorism. And what we are asking is, if Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, aren't we going to see the same thing happening the next year? I mean, it's like the canary in the mine for us.
Right. Wang Guan, in China, Hillary Clinton, does she have a high profile there?
Well, not exactly. China is, well, we can be very patriotic or nationalistic, depending who you listen to. And then Hillary Clinton's remarks on South China Sea and issues like that does not really considered favorable to Chinese.
Okay, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.